Do you hear this? This is what I have to deal with whenever I want to record. Hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Drunk History with Graf. This is a series in which I drink some alcohol and talk about history, starting from the Bronze Age, going all the way up to the present day. In the last episode, we talked about the origins of the First Triumvirate, a political alliance between three of the most powerful Roman politicians of the era: Gaius Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. In this episode, we are going to explore how this alliance moves going forward, what moves they make, and some of the actions they took to make them some of the most famous people in the history of the world. Right, so in the last episode, the Mediterranean Sea looked like this. Not a whole lot has changed since last time, so I'm just gonna move straight on to where we left off. That being in the year 59 BC, with Julius Caesar being elected as consul for the first time. Now, last episode I mentioned how Pompey was actually too young to run as consul, but because of political bribery and the power of his army, managed to push it through anyway. Caesar was also too young to be consul. Specifically, he was 2 years too young to be consul. However, Caesar got a little help from an unexpected place, because it turns out that Sulla, when he was running Rome, passed laws that allowed members of the old patrician families of Rome to be eligible for being able to hold office for 2 years before plebs could. And because Caesar was from the gens Julii, he was from one of the most well-respected families in the city, so this gave him a free pass. Now, one of the first things that happens to a consul once they take office is the Senate gets together and they assign them a province that they will govern at the end of their term. However, one thing to note is that the Senate is very unhappy with Caesar generally, because Caesar is from the faction called the Populares, and the majority of senators are from the Optimates, or Optimates. The Populares is of course the sort of populist, comparatively democratic faction, and the Optimates are the pro-aristocratic faction. So the extremely salty Optimates decide instead they're going to vote, instead of giving Caesar his own province, he would be given the responsibility for upkeeping the woodlands and country lanes of Italy. This is a very deliberate snub, but Caesar does not have the power in the Senate to veto this yet. So, now that Caesar is the consul, he now has to work with Pompey and Crassus's agendas, because they are the people who put him there in the first place. Previously, lazy conservatives vetoed pretty much everything that Pompey and Crassus had attempted to put through, just so they wouldn't have to actually do anything. So their agendas are as follows. Pompey, having conquered a large informal empire in the east, wanted these territories that he had conquered to be ratified as Roman provinces. And then he wanted to set up colonies all over the place, specifically for his veterans from his legions. Now remember, with Pompey, a lot of his political power and influence comes from his army. He's very popular with the troops, he's popular because he got a lot of shit done, and the troops are a very powerful bloc, because not only are they armed, trained for war, but they also command a lot of respect in Roman society. So this is kind of important. Crassus is a little more boring. In a lot of his endeavours to become wealthy, he took out a fair amount of loans from a variety of people, which made him indebted to them. But a lot of the people who he is indebted to are also in debt. So instead of asking him to cash in all of the debt that he owes, these people instead ask Crassus to pursue an agenda of debt cancellation in general. One of the big powers behind this are the tax collectors of Rome, which, quite entertainingly, were run as a private enterprise with their own tax stock market. So when they overbid, they have problems, and this is what happened. And because Crassus was in their debt, he was pushing this through. Next thing that Caesar does is put forth the Land Reform Bill. Now, I vastly simplified this last time, saying it's the exact same thing that the Gracchi brothers put through, but that's not true. What this bill was supposed to do was it created an office, a commission, which intended to buy excess land from latifundia and then distribute it via lottery to the urban poor or to Pompey's veterans. And when this thing eventually does get put through, this commission is then entirely staffed by Caesar's supporters. In fact, Pompey and Crassus actually end up on the commission as part of the people who decide what's going on. But as this bill has just finished being proposed and they were preparing for the vote, a senator called Cato, Cato the Younger in this case, stands up and starts talking at length about how it's just not a good time for a bill like this. But then he doesn't stop talking. And what Cato was doing is called filibustering. So when a Roman senator is speaking on an issue, they cannot be interrupted. Nothing can interrupt a senator until they sit down. So what Cato has decided to do was just to continue speaking and not stop until the Senate had to be adjourned because it fucking ran out of time. This is a valid political tactic in Rome, and in fact, it's actually still a valid political tactic in the American Senate. I recall when I was doing my politics course, I found out about an incident in which a Republican senator, finding a bill that he didn't like, I can't remember who it was or what bill it was, but they got out the book Green Eggs and Ham and read it aloud to the Senate, over and over and over again, until they had to stop. If I remember, Drunk Editor Graf will put a quick video of this happening in the background. So when Caesar realizes what's going on, he completely loses his temper and orders some of his lictors to go and arrest Cato. This is an extremely bad look because it looks very tyrannical, and a number of senators storm out in anger, one of them even volunteering to go to prison with Cato, saying he'd rather be in prison with Cato than in the Senate with Caesar. So Cato ends up getting released, and nothing ends up getting done. Except that, instead of nothing getting done, Caesar just picks up the bill and pins it up to the wall outside and says, okay, it's been passed, and ignores the Senate completely. In future meetings, basically every single time that Caesar would put forward something, the first people who would get to speak on and give an opinion on this would be ex-consuls. And who happens to be ex-consuls of Rome? Pompey and Crassus, of course. So they immediately get to speak on whatever it is that Caesar has to say, and they give a glowing recommendation every single time, and everyone else that comes after them sees the first two people that stood up to speak about this bill immediately praising it, are not comfortable with opposing it. This is buoyed up by the fact that nobody else knows about the triumvirate. The triumvirate is a completely secret deal, a secret alliance. Nobody knows. And to compound this further, everyone knows that Pompey and Crassus fucking hate each other. So there's no way that they would actually be supporting the same points unless they were, like, really good or something. People just didn't want to speak up against it. During this year, Caesar's daughter Julia actually ends up getting married to Pompey, which basically solidifies this alliance, because now Pompey is Caesar's son-in-law, so family. On multiple occasions, Caesar would attempt to make moves and pass forth legislation, but what would frequently happen is that the instances in which this was happening would be rescheduled to coincide with religious holidays, and that meant that they all had to be cancelled. Except for the fact that Caesar's political enemies forgot one thing. Remember in the last episode, Caesar is the Pontifex Maximus. He's the head priest. So whenever these holidays happen and they say, oh no, religious reasons, this has to be cancelled because it's a holiday, Caesar would step forward and say, actually, I'm the head priest, and Jupiter's okay with it, so we're going to do it anyway. So eventually, Caesar puts forward a bill which would replace his governorship of woods and country roads of Italy, which is a ridiculous fucking thing anyway, to instead give him the provinces of Illyria and Cisalpine Gaul, which is these two. Now, this is very important, because the whole point about him being given the country roads and shit is not just as a snub, it's very deliberate. You see, when someone is sworn in as consul, they gain a status called Imperiium, which means leadership. And what Imperium is it is a Roman political term intended to denote people who act as the head of state, which means they have all of the powers of the state and cannot be legally prosecuted. And this is very important to Caesar because he's done a lot of very, very dodgy things that will almost certainly get him fucking arrested as soon as his Imperium wears off. So, what the giving him the country roads of Italy is meant to do is it's meant to deny him a province. Because provinces aren't just intended to be used as cash cows. Being given governorship of a province also gives one Imperium. And yes, if you're wondering, yes, Imperium is indeed where the term Imperator, Empire, and Emperor comes from. So what Caesar really needs is he needs to be given governorship of a province, which will give him more Imperium. What he will then do is do everything he can to get this governorship extended, because normally it's 5 years. He wants it to be 10, because 10 years is the amount of time that you have to wait before running for consul again. This way he can string this out as long as he can to have Imperium for as long as possible so that he can't be prosecuted for all of the dodgy things that he's done in office. And just in case you've forgotten all of the dodgy things that Caesar has done while in office, drunk editor Graf, take it away. So just as Caesar's term as consul is about to end, something incredibly important which will potentially change the future of history forever happens. And that is that the governor of Transalpine Gaul, that being here, dies. And that means that a replacement is needed immediately. But you can only become governor of a province if you are an ex-consul. So this means that as soon as Caesar's term ends, he gets Transalpine Gaul as well. And when you become governor of a province, that means you get every single legion that is within those provinces. This makes Caesar extremely powerful, because he not only holds 3 fucking provinces, which is mad, but he also owns every single legion within that. And I can't quite recall, but I think that's 6 legions. 6 fucking legions. That is a lot. That is a lot of goddamn legions. And in addition, if you're wondering about the whole Cisalpine, Transalpine Gaul thing, Cis basically means here and trans means there, or us and them, or something along those lines. And yes, that is also the origin of the terms transgender and cisgender, as much as I despise those terms. So Cisalpine Gaul means the Gaul that is this side of the Alps, Transalpine Gaul means the Gaul that is that side of the Alps. So, 58 BC, Caesar heads north to Gaul to take command. And very interesting things start to happen almost immediately. So a Gallic tribe called the Helvetii, turns out they're also doing a migration. The reasons for this aren't entirely clear. All it's known is this is a Gallic tribe that is moving sort of from east to west across what's modern-day Switzerland. And of course the Helvetii also gave their name to Switzerland because in Swiss, then the Swiss are called the Helvetica. Now, these Helvetii aren't going anywhere particularly dangerous for Rome, but remember in the last couple of episodes, when there has been tribal migration, Rome has had Gallic allies which have asked Rome for help. And there is indeed legislation which demands that the governor of Trans and Cisalpine Gaul defend their Gallic allies from attack. And there are a couple of Gallic tribes in the area that the Helvetii are about to fucking plow through that are allies to Rome. So Caesar does have to intervene. Now, what's about to happen is the start of the Gallic Wars. It's a very, very long and complex series of history which is very well documented by Caesar himself, partly his history and partly his political propaganda. But they are extremely detailed and I'm gonna gloss over, basically just like the conquest of Alexander, I'm going to gloss over most of it. However, if you do want a more in-depth explanation of this, I can recommend the YouTube channel Historia Civilis, which has a very long and very detailed series, which you can find up in the corner here. So if you want a detailed explanation, you can go there, but here you're gonna get the simplified version. So Caesar gets into battle with the Helvetii and fucking destroys them. Once this happens, a massive number of Gallic emissaries come to Kaiser and tell him that they have some serious problems that they would like him to help. And by the fact that they're going and asking him for help, that technically makes them allies of Rome. So he is basically obligated to go and help them. And they tell him that there's a German tribe led by the king Ariovistus, who is moving German troops across the Rhine into Gaul, and that he needs to go and help them. Which he does. And again, he is very successful. Although this is a very controversial move, because despite this, Ariovistus is also a Roman ally. He just kind of didn't tell anyone that he was moving into Gaul. So what Kaiser's basically doing is he's going to attack a Roman ally in defense of another Roman ally. Because people just aren't fucking talking to each other. This is what happens when you go into quarantine for 2 years, okay? You get mad because people don't fucking talk to each other. And then there's the fucking... Right, sorry about that. Meanwhile, back in Rome, very strange things are happening, and mostly bad things. So, Caesar has a friend in Rome called Claudius, and he is tribune of the plebs, which is a relatively powerful position, albeit one that got slightly nerfed under Sulla. But it is a political position that does have some influence. And Claudius basically starts getting a bit too big for his boots. So the first thing that he starts doing is he starts messing with his political opponents. The first one is Cato, who he ends up sending on a bullshit mission to Cyprus. Then he gets bullshit charges against another politician called Cicero, who I'm definitely going to do a Side of Stories episode on because he's kinda cool. But Cicero is actually Pompey Magnus's friend, which is a problem because Claudius is supposed to be Caesar's friend, and Caesar's supposed to be Pompey's friend. But because Pompey is Cicero's friend, Pompey also ends up getting harassed by Claudius's mobs, which is a problem, because now Pompey is starting to lose trust in Caesar, because Caesar is supposed to be Claudius's friend. I'm sorry if this is really fucking confusing, but just bear with me. So 57 BC turns around and you get 2 new consuls whose names I've completely forgotten because I am lazy. And these guys pretty much immediately redact Cicero's banishment, and he ends up moving back to Rome. However, Claudius is very unhappy about this, and he sends out gangs with swords to fuck up anyone who opposes him. Now, an optimate politician also starts arming gangs of thugs with swords to go and fuck up Claudius's gangs. This is basically as fucked as Rome has ever been. Even back when the Gracchi brothers were causing chaos, it wasn't this bad. There were not people with fucking swords going around killing each other. And the more chaos this causes, the less trustworthy Pompey is of Caesar, because this is all Claudius's fault, and Caesar is expected to basically keep him on a leash, which he's not doing. Right, back to Gaul. Now at this point, Caesar is starting to have ambitions. So he notices that there is a tribe in northern Gaul called the Belgae, who are assembling an army for reasons unknown to him. And so seeing them as a threat to Rome's Gallic allies, he just attacks them. Caesar gets into one battle with the Belgae, which appears to be going okay for the Gauls, but then, inexplicably, they retreat. Caesar once again chases them. They get into another battle with the Belgae, only for the Gallic host to inexplicably break up into its component parts and just fucking go home. Basically, no one realizes why they do this, but this isn't even the only time that they do this. Caesar would get into multiple fights with the Belgae, and a lot of the time, when the battles were looking badly, all the tribal chiefs in the Belgae Confederation would get together and say, you know what, should we just go home? And they do, and they just go home. This is also one of the things that kind of feeds into the Roman idea of the Gauls as being uncivilized savages, because they do the strangest things sometimes. Because this makes absolutely no sense to the Romans, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. So we're at the point where Pompey and Crassus can now run for consul again. And so Caesar moves back to Cisalpine Gaul and organizes a conference with them at Luca. And Crassus and Pompey are almost at each other's throats at this point over the whole Claudius thing. as well as the fact that Pompey is intending to go on another campaign in Syria, and fucking mobs led by Claudius demand that he refuse and give the post instead to Crassus. So people are mad. People are really mad. So Caesar does his thing and mediates. So he encourages Crassus and Pompey to run for consul again, mainly for the purpose of extending his governorship for reasons I've already explained about Imperiium, and he's demanded that they push for the provinces of Hispania and Syria. So Pompey will get Hispania and Crassus gets Syria. And this is mainly to just kind of deal with the mob problem. If Crassus gets Syria, then all of the mobs demanding that he get Syria will shut the fuck up. So after this, Caesar returns to Transalpine Gaul and starts messing around with the Gauls again. So at this point, it's getting pretty evident that Caesar is just bloodthirsty and wants to conquer, because at this point, he goes to a tribe called the Veneti, which are a sort of a seafaring tribe near what is modern-day Brittany and Normandy. He sends a bunch of diplomats to them, who deliberately cause a fuss and get arrested for fucking around and finding out. And as soon as this happens, Caesar immediately declares war on them and says they are in revolt. Which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because in the words of Braveheart,
never in my whole life did I swear allegiance to him.
Yeah. So he rushes through the Veneti lands, plundering the fuck out of everything he finds and setting it all on fire. After this, another German confederation crosses the Rhine into Gaul. Caesar brings up his guys and goes and fights them and destroys them. And at this point, Caesar is pretty sick of the Germans, so he gets together an army, builds a massive fuck-off bridge across the Rhine, and marches into Germany. At this point, the Germans retreat to the forests and watch as Caesar sets fire to everything that he can find. Doesn't find a whole lot of people, so he just wanders around setting things on fire until he's satisfied that he's got the message across and returns back to Gaul. This is when we start to get some very interesting things. Caesar makes a, again, very plainly bullshit claim that the Britons are supporting the Gauls. And the Britons might be pretty obvious by the name, but they hail from the islands of Britain. Now, Britain, or Britannia rather I should say, is a very, very strange place. In the Roman mind, it is borderline mythological. Basically no one knows anything about Britain. Some people suspect that there's an entire whole-ass continent on the other side of the English Channel. Some people believe that the island isn't real. Some people believe that the English Channel is the equivalent of the River Styx, and that Britain is where you go when you die, and that's the afterlife. So it is borderline mythical. So what Caesar's really doing here is he's trying to justify an invasion of Britain so that he can say to everyone, I went to Britain, aren't I great? In addition, also, the Britons are also a very strange people. So normally when you think of Celts, you think there's a sort of a very single unified Celtic kind of thing. But in reality, there's actually two kinds of Celts. There's Gallic Celts and Brittonic Celts. So Gallic Celts are peoples like the Gauls that Caesar has been fighting thus far in Gaul, as well as peoples like the Irish and the Scots. Brittonic Celts are mostly extinct now, but there is a couple of little populations of Brittonic Celts, such as in Cornwall, Cymru, aka Wales, and Brittany. A lot of people have accounted for this, suggesting that the Brittonic Celts are actually originally a completely separate, perhaps even pre-Indo-European group that ended up adopting Gallic culture through trade with Gaul, which is why they sort of appear like a weird fucked up imitation of Gallic culture instead of true Gallic culture, I guess. So Caesar gets a bunch of ships, some of which actually end up being plundered from the Veneti, and sails across the English Channel and arrives in Kent. Now Britain, as I mentioned, is basically like another world. The Brittonic Celts are a very strange and weird people. They're very famous for their blue body paint. A lot of people say that Gauls and Celts all fight with this weird fucking body paint. No, it's just the Brittonic groups that do this. Most Celts have instances of people who fight naked, but it's only the Brittonic Celts that do the paint thing. Another very strange thing that the Brittonic Celts do is they have chariots. I'm sorry, fucking what? Why do they have chariots? So you can understand how this completely confuses the hell out of the Romans when they hear about this, because chariots make no sense. Why on earth would you use a chariot and not just cavalry? But inexplicably, the Britons actually use this chariot cavalry to extremely good effect against Caesar, because with the chariots, you can decently replicate nomad hit-and-run tactics. Chariots are generally considered to not be particularly efficient because they require more training, more material, more upkeep, and 2 or 3 times the number of horses that an ordinary cavalry unit does. But the fact that you can get a javelinier on the back of a chariot and just sort of drive it around makes them decently effective. So Caesar goes on a small campaign against the Britons, only for a storm to turn up and fuck up a bunch of his ships. Caesar kind of panics at this and realizes that he might be stranded if he doesn't do something, so he immediately sets about repairing as many of the ships as he can, and as soon as he can, leaves immediately, just to prevent himself from getting stranded in Britain, because that's not an option for him. After returning to Gaul, he decides he's going to have another crack at it and assembles another fleet and another bunch of legions and heads off to try and conquer Britain again. However, this time he basically just kind of fannies around in Kent for a while before another storm hits and he has to bail out again. Now, Caesar makes a big deal in his reporting about what's going on. It says that he goes and he conquers an entire kingdom in Kent and he pushes all the way up to the Thames and over the other side. But we're fairly certain that this is embellished propaganda and he never really gets this far. Right, now we're going to go over to the other side of the world. Well, really the other side of the Roman Empire, but, you know, to any Roman, the Roman Empire is the whole world. Nothing outside fucking matters. Fuck 'em. So, Crassus's term as consul has run out, and so he's now been installed as the governor of Syria. But despite this, Crassus isn't that happy, because Syria is not as wealthy as a province as it used to be. So he has some things to do. Now, up until this point, Parthia, neighbouring Parthia, has been on fairly good terms with Rome since Pompey basically negotiated with them to let him savage the fuck out of Pontus and not lift a finger. Crassus, on the other hand, is starting to get salty about Pompey, because Pompey, after fighting with Sulla, got given the cognomen Magnus, or the Great, which is the same title that got given to Alexander the Great. And Crassus really hates Pompey, and so he decides he wants to show up Pompey by achieving what, in his eyes, Pompey hasn't earned, that being the title of Great for having conquered Persia as Alexander did. Additionally, he also wants to be able to yoink the Parthian Empire and use it as a cash cow. So Crassus, basically completely unprovoked, decides that he's going to attack the Parthian Empire and take it over for himself. So, basically, he's not ready for this. When he makes his intentions clear, he actually ends up getting a message from the king of Armenia, offering him safe passage through his land to flank the Parthians and attack them from the north. But when Crassus hears this, he throws it out and ignores it. Says, "No, I'm not doing it, I don't care, fuck off." Then, the Armenian king sends another message saying, "I will give you 40,000 soldiers to help you. Don't go through the desert." And Crassus says, "Fuck off, I'm not listening to you, I'm a Roman and you're a barbarian." Doesn't listen to him, and he just marches pretty much straight east, straight towards the Parthians. In the desert, he finds a fuck ton of tracks, which are suggesting the presence of an army. Now, Crassus's timing for this campaign is actually pretty good, because it turns out that the Parthian Empire is in the middle of a civil war when this is happening. So it seems like a pretty good idea that he can just take it while everyone's distracted fighting each other. But really, he didn't plan this at all. He marches on into the desert to try and basically take over Mesopotamia, because that's the richest part of it. The Tigris and the Euphrates give some pretty nice farmland, and that's worth a decent amount of money. However, shortly outside of the village of Carrhae, Crassus encounters a Parthian army. However, he is surprised to find out that because this is a nomad army, they are entirely made up of cavalry. And this confuses Crassus because he's never encountered nomads before, and he doesn't know how they behave and how they fight. what he quickly realizes is that they will outflank him with their superior speed. So what he ends up doing is he ends up moving his troops into a perfect square formation, which essentially means that they have fighters on all sides and therefore cannot be flanked. However, this does make them relatively immobile and makes it very hard for them to actually attack. But that's okay, because that's not the plan. The plan is for the Parthians to ride circles around them for hours, expend all of their arrows, run out of ammunition, and be forced to retreat. However, as the hours go on and the arrows continue falling, this doesn't happen. This is because what has happened is that the Parthians brought a shit ton of camels loaded with arrows, which they're also riding around them in circles as basically ammo resupply dumps. So whenever any given Parthian archer runs out of arrows, then they just ride up to the nearest camel train and pick up a new quiver, and just continue launching. And they have a shit ton of arrows, and they can just keep going at this for hours. As the hours drag on and the heavy Roman infantry tires under the hot Arabian sun, more and more legionnaires start dying. Even though the scutum and the Roman armor is relatively strong against this, it doesn't stop after hours. The longer it goes on, the more arrows start finding their way through shields and the more people start dying. Eventually, Crassus is forced to surrender. He attempts to ride out for negotiations, and the Parthians send a diplomat. However, when they meet, he is instead ushered onto a big and elaborately decorated horse, where he is to be taken away. Most of the Roman army ends up being taken prisoner. A few months later, the Parthian king is enjoying a diplomatic meeting with the Armenian king. This is also the same Armenian king who had suggested to Crassus that he invade Parthia through Armenia and given him 40,000 troops. They are enjoying a performance of the Belgae, which is a Greek play by the playwright Euripides. Only, when it was time to bring out the prop head of Pentheus, a character in the play, instead they used Crassus's head as the prop. According to Plutarch later, the Parthian king dressed up a Roman prisoner in women's clothing and called him Imperator Crassus, and paraded him around Parthia for everyone to see. Also according to Plutarch, the Parthians got Crassus's body and poured molten gold down its throat. Although we are fairly certain that this is not real. We're more and more thinking that basically Plutarch used this as a political statement, and he sort of self-inserted himself as the Parthian king, saying that this is what he would have done, because he views Crassus's expedition in Parthia as being just thirst for more money, hence the symbolism of him having gold poured down his throat. Fuck me, that was a long-ass episode. Unfortunately, I just couldn't cut everything out because it's just so detailed. At the end of this episode, the map looks like this. Caesar has conquered a bunch of Gaul. Crassus has fucking done nothing to Parthia other than die humiliatingly. And the rest of the world looks basically exactly the same. Right, in the next episode, I'm going to talk about the rest of the Gallic Wars and Caesar's increasingly strained relationship with Pompey. And I will explain how this finally all reaches breaking point when the die is cast. This has been Graf. I will see you next time. Thank you very much. Oh no, religious reasons. This has to be cancelled because it's a holiday. Then Kaiser will just step forward and say, actually, I'm the head poop.